Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to another in the series of ISBL podcasts. I'm delighted to be joined today by Lee Miller, who's the Deputy CEO of the Thinking Schools Academy Trust, has an incredibly strong track record as a highly effective CFO, Chief Operating Officer, and now in his role as Deputy CEO. Welcome, Lee. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Please feel free to introduce yourself and go into a bit more detail in terms of the work that you are currently responsible for and things you've done in the past.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk with you this afternoon. So a bit of background on me. I've been working in the sector for nearly 17 years now, and I started off as a standalone business manager in a maintained school, and through my time working with that secondary school, we were part of kind of an early kind of conversion into an academy trust, and I was fortunately offered the opportunity to become the kind of finance director of that academy trust when we first converted back in 2013. And since then, the role of the finance director has ballooned, and certainly I've kind of gone on a really interesting journey with the Academy Trust to my role now as the Deputy Chief Executive for the Thinking Schools Academy Trust. And it's an interesting title. It's hard to kind of define exactly what it actually does, but I kind of best describe it to people who don't work in education is kind of everything that's really not to do with teaching and learning. It generally falls under my accountability, but I always say I am part of the teaching and learning strategy, and you know that you can't kind of separate those 2 points, but the accountabilities for everything else that sits outside of teaching and learning generally falls under the structure of me. And yeah, I've been fortunate to work in some very kind of interesting kind of situations, and I've been over the last few years not only working in my own trust, but also supporting some other trusts that have perhaps got themselves into difficult situations, and been given the opportunity to kind of have my input in their kind of their future strategy.
That's really helpful, and actually it's a nice segue because you know, you talk about your role be encompassing and overseeing, if you like, everything that's non-pedagogical, yet you see yourself very much as instrumental in the whole operation, the whole piece. I just wondered what your views are in terms of school resource management, and I talk about school resource management in the broadest sense. I mean, sometimes when we use the language of resources, people immediately think of pens and paper and paint and clay, and you know the consumables that teachers use in delivering teaching and learning. But actually resources are everything. It's it's human resources, it's the funds available to us, it's the premises we occupy, and even the compliance elements are only a response to the discharging of those resources, and the safeguarding of assets and so forth. So school resource management in the broadest sense. I'm just trying to get your perspectives on the role of the management of those resources in facilitating school improvement, and how getting that right is so instrumental to the quality of teaching and learning.
Yeah, and I suppose I can take you back to kind of when I first started as a kind of a standalone business manager for the secondary school, and I came in from outside the sector. I was fortunate to have gone through a chartered accountant's qualification. Got to the end of that qualification and thought, I don't want to be an accountant, I want to be something more than that, and hence kind of I wanted to join the education sector. But one of the first questions that I started to explore when I first arrived was to kind of really understand the kind of the key numbers, the key things that make a difference to a school. And everyone will know that actually, it is a staff-heavy kind of expense situation where schools, in effect, if you control the staffing cost, you are controlling predominantly the majority of the kind of the financial health of an organisation. And I think that the heart of what a business manager needs to do is to make sure that the organisation, whether that's a single school or multi-academy trust, is continuing to promote a good, well-run, financially healthy organisation. And so what I focused on when I first joined the sector was to really understand, well, what drives our staffing cost? And one of the best CPD opportunities that I went on, back when I very, very first started, was a timetabling course. And I remember talking to the head teacher at the time saying, well, this is unusual, business manager wanting to understand how the timetable works. But actually, when you think about it, the timetable drives our staffing costs and the staffing costs of all the decisions that we make. So for you to be an effective finance director, you really need to understand the operational side of actually what drives that particular cost. And I did the course not because I wanted to write a timetable, but because I wanted to have an intelligent conversation with the timetabler, so that when it was presented to me and discussed with me, I could have a conversation back with them around, well, why have we done this? Why is this structured in this way? Because by doing that, you are adding X amount of cost to the overall running of the school. And that level of conversation and discussion really helped me understand the kind of the numbers, the costs associated with delivering on that timetable. But I believe it actually helped with the school rethink around some of the decisions it was making around the timetable and the allocations around that. And so when I look back at those very early days, one of the key decisions that I insisted on when I first joined was that my role was to sit round the table with the senior leadership team to be part of discussions, not just about finance, but about the wider running of schools, so that I could have those conversations, I could be part of those discussions, but also part of the decision making around that. But in order to get to that point, I needed to make sure I invested time in understanding the other side of the coin, understanding the other side of kind of what drives a timetable, what happens in a classroom. And I think I can't underestimate the power that has led to in me beginning to understand how best to run an efficient education organisation.
No, it's really, really helpful. I mean, you raised some important issues, and I had noted before you started to talk the importance of bringing people with you on the journey of school resource management optimization, if you like, school resource optimization, and I think you've raised the point which has been debated. And continues to be debated, and that's joined up leadership, where pedagogy, governance and business are working seamlessly together, not in silos. And SPPs need to understand the context, the ambition, the aims of the organisation in order that they can best help to deploy resources in the most effective way. Just kind of progressing that conversation a little bit further. What we see across the school business leadership landscape and across our community is individuals who are making different levels of contribution to a school or a trust, and we've characterized those contributions as three broad areas. So those that have a generalist function, do a bit of everything. Quite often the generalist functions you see in the smaller schools or at a local level. Those that are specialising in an area like finance or HR or premises, estates, even procurement, and then those executive roles that have that helicopter view across groups of schools, probably form part of the central team. Now, the extent to which any one of those roles is part of strategic leadership conversations will largely depend on the way that the organisation is structured and the influence they may have locally or centrally. What's your experience of those three roles that I've described, and how they interact with the layers of management within a trust structure?
You started off by saying around the importance of the business professional understanding the aims of the organisation. I would go one step further, and I'd say it's actually important that they help influence the aims of the organisation as well. And because the role of the business professional is not just about, that's what you want to do, chief executive, that's what you want to do, head teacher, now let me go and find a way of making it happen. It's having the critical conversations around, okay, are we doing the right things in the right way? That can then lead to the operational detail of the delivery. But I think the real importance of whatever role, whether it's the generalist, specialist, or the executive role, actually being able to be part of those discussions to kind of have that influence, I think is incredibly important and shouldn't be understated in the objective of anyone's role who has the pleasure of working in one of those levels. I think it's right to identify that there are different levels and different ways of working. Each of them are as important as the next. They just have a slightly different perspective. And in my own organisation, I have generalist kind of business leaders that look after a wide sections of responsibilities, and that's really important, because for me that they're like my eyes and ears on the ground. They give me that kind of perspective of kind of actually ensuring that all the services are delivered in the way that I would expect them to be delivered, and they act as that kind of critical friend to the services that are being delivered on their behalf, maybe by the central team, maybe by an external contractor, but someone who kind of quality assures the kind of provision that's being put in place by the various different contracts that exist there. So there'll always be a place for that role. Equally, there is a place for those specialist leaders, particularly as we've moved, for those who are listening in Academy Trust will know that there are some kind of very specialised, highly technical areas that we need to grapple with. And we don't want to get to the situation where we are jack of all trades, master of none. And I think it's absolutely right to pull on those specialist leaders to kind of really drive some radical and innovative ways of delivering education for the 21st century. And then you have that executive kind of leader that kind of, I suppose, aligned to my role. I kind of just see myself as, I just make sure the machine works. There are a number of different, it sounds, I know this is being used by other organisations, but there are a number of cogs in this machine. And I suppose my job is just to make sure that all those cogs are kind of ending up in the right position to end up adding value to the organisation. And all those roles need to be part of that discussion around influencing what the organisation is doing next. And and there are great examples where a good executive leader will bring in those specialist leaders to work alongside those generalist leaders to really drive improvements. And I think there is a role for all three levels as part of a successful education organisation going forward.
Yeah, no. I mean, I would agree completely. I think that we, that there are obviously pay ranges across our system. One would hope that they're based on measures which are fair and reasonable, such as experience, qualifications, the scale of accountability. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter whether you're operating locally or in a central team, or you're specialising and supporting a school, all of those functions are critical to our system. I love the idea of school business leaders not only being done to, but kind of providing solutions, influencing solutions. I've been using the language of architects of solutions, and I think in many respects the pandemic has shown us that school business leaders can bring to the table solutions, not only respond to prescribed ways of working or directives from colleagues. So no, really like that. Just in terms of that, we know that in our workforce survey, the one we conducted towards the end of 2019, suggested that we've got a mix of experience, qualifications, and individuals working in standalone settings and larger, more complex settings. But in terms of the spectrum of ability, if you like, across the 11,000 or so school business leaders are in the system, do you think we need minimum standards? And what's your view in terms of qualifications? What should we be expecting from our school business leaders in terms of their commitment to CPD? And should we be saying that in order to perform a particular function, for example, CFO, that you need to be degree qualified, or you need to be an accountant, or have done a business related qualification? What are your views on that?
So I do think that there needs to be a level of kind of, you described it as minimum expectations for each individual role. I kind of feel that there's what we don't want to do is create barriers for people to want to join the sector and be part of what I believe is an amazing kind of career opportunity. And so there's I think what we as a sector need to do is to really help scaffold the kind of training and development offered for the future kind of CFOs, business managers, to make sure that they can see that they perhaps don't need that level of understanding. They don't need those qualifications to start with, but actually that there's a program that people can go on to take them through that journey so they can become the most effective individual possible. And we see that working well within teachers. We this time of year we're looking at those kind of recruitment opportunities. We are targeting kind of our future leaders. We're providing them that kind of, right, join us here, we will put you through these kind of CPD development opportunities, and you will become this kind of leader or this kind of a teacher. And we're quite good as a sector about kind of almost going right back to kind of universities and talking to students at universities around, you want to be a teacher, these are the pathways that you can explore in order to get into teaching. I think we're less clear around that when it becomes certainly for the kind of business leadership role. And I know you guys have done a lot of work around kind of getting those standards, those pathways developed, and those different levels kind of developed to kind of promote on that. And I think what we need to do as a sector is kind of push them to the market, to the individuals that would be interested in those roles, and somehow making it clear that there is a career path open for these individuals. Because I don't always believe that university students automatically think of education as being a potential career for a chief finance officer. It's not a natural link for students to make, and I think we're missing a pipeline of future talent that I think we should be trying to trap at the earliest part and say, look at the fantastic opportunities that exist for you, and this is how we can help structure that kind of CPD development journey for you.
Yeah, really important. Love the idea of creating that scaffolding, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we're about to publish a blueprint. It's due to to be provided to the sector at large before Easter. And in there we talk a lot about the importance of a succession pipeline. Again, the workforce survey tells us that a fairly large percentage of the workforce is approaching retirement, and we need that next cohort of professionals coming through. And I think that the comment you made about, you know, do undergraduates, the school leavers, think about a career in education beyond teaching as something that's exciting, that has no glass ceiling, that can lead to a very fulfilling career? And probably the answer to that is no. And we do need to shine a spotlight on those individuals who have, you know, gone on a journey and are now enjoying a position of you know, tremendous responsibility and actually influencing the life chances of whole communities of learners. It's a wonderful journey, one you've clearly been on. So we need to do more in that regard. It's interesting. I had conversations with both Lord Agnew and before that with Lord Nash about you know, the accountancy qualification as a proxy, as the reference point for CFOs, and you know, both of them put it to me, you know, Stephen, do we have confidence in the existing cohort of practitioners, or should we be looking outside? And I said, my response was, look, we've got, you know, 11,000 enthusiastic, capable, energetic individuals, and the education landscape has changed. The requirements on schools individually, particularly those now operating outside of local authority control, means that the emphasis has changed, and so the training and development needs to change. But we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think what you've said is absolutely right, is that we need to support colleagues on that learning journey, and recognise that some, you know, people come with different starting points. Some will have grown in the role over time, you know, maybe starting in an admin role and then picking up responsibility along the way. Some will have come in sideways and may have business experience but not the school context, and others will have gone on, and there are a few examples of that, with very a real sense of purpose of coming to the sector, taking qualification after qualification, and progress very quickly. So it's horses for courses to an extent. And again, you know, the three flavors of leadership that we talked about, you know, depending on where you want to develop your career, will depend on the qualifications and the experience and the training that you need. But the point is that we need to make training accessible, and we need to guide people through that journey. And so I don't think it's a case of giving up on the existing cohort of school business leaders at all. I think it's about supporting them and helping them to develop and train. But the caveat to that is, if you believed you're the finished article and there's no more learning to be done, then I think that puts everyone in a very difficult position. And I'm not suggesting that everyone has to go and do an MBA or a master's, but I think everybody should be prepared to continue their learning journey, which hopefully concurs with you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the bit I would add to that is the qualification doesn't make a good chief finance officer or a good business manager. In the same way that a head teacher who is successful at getting MPQH doesn't automatically make them a fantastic head teacher. And I think what the sector needs to consider is around, how do we develop the person? I think the qualification is one element, and I think absolutely the willingness to learn, the willingness to kind of develop as through that qualification framework is absolutely fundamental to kind of the growth of knowledge. But at the same time, we've got to be comfortable about how we develop the individuals, and we unfortunately at the moment, it feels quite a negative kind of framework where school leaders, if they go in to support another business leader, it feels like something's gone wrong. I look at the kind of the SRMA program that's been developed over the last few years with the best intention. It's fallen back into a kind of a model that these very experienced and highly professional people are dealing with the difficult cases. And actually, what we need to get to a point of is a bit like how the National Leaders of Education model works. It's going in to improve practice from a good starting point. It's not about going in to kind of deal with all the kind of things that are wrong. It's about helping people become better. And I just don't think the label fits at the moment, and somehow going forward, I would encourage the sector to start to think about how do we make that school to school, that mat to mat support between business leaders feel like a far more positive engagement, rather than say what I'm seeing and hearing and feeling at the moment around the engagement.
Really important point. And hopefully it will please you to hear that we have been lobbying and continue to lobby for national leaders of resource management alongside national leaders of education, national leaders of governance. It's very encouraging that the Baroness Berridge is in the same breath as NLEs and NLGs. She's referring to SRMAs, but I think the department and ministers recognise that the original narrative around SRMAs and before that school efficiency advisors, and that was even more problematic, had negative connotations, one of intervention, inspection via the back door, and all that kind of language. Where I think the move now is much more around here's a group of very skilled individuals that can support you in making improvements. It's a conversation. There are a set of recommendations which you can choose to ignore if you wish, or pick out the ones that are helpful to you. And there's no sanction. Now, clearly, if you're a school on the verge of an FNTI, a trust on the verge of an FNTI, and you choose to ignore everything and things continue to go badly, it will be seen in a dim light if you were dismissive of all the recommendations. But that aside, I think the idea is much more collaborative, much more consensual, and so hopefully we're seeing a bit of a shift. But I agree. I would like to see school business professionals with the skills and experience provided with that national leader designation, and I think it should be a much more rather than an intervention, a development and growth proposition where people can engage in the services of these individuals, and it's sector-led self-improvement, it's system leadership in practice. It's all the things that have been talked about for many years, and we want to see thrive and flourish. Again, national leaders of education as a concept is something that's embedded in the blueprint, which will come out in due course. That's really helpful. We've just got a few more minutes, and I wondered if Lee, if we could just touch on the thorny issue of school business professional pay, and if you had any kind of thoughts on that. And I'll just set the context a little bit. There have been discussions over the years about school business leaders being part of the teacher pay scales, or there being a set of pay arrangements that are created centrally and respected across the system. In a deregulated environment, I don't think there's huge ministerial appetite for that. But what I've said is that I think that the sector itself could coalesce around pay arrangements for school business leaders based on those flavours and accountability, qualifications and experience, and I don't think it's beyond us as a sector to determine pay ranges which are fair and equitable. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't want to get to a point where there is so much inflexibility around pay. I think it's very difficult to define one chief finance officer's responsibility in one trust or one school compared to another. There's so much variability between what kind of the specific accountabilities and responsibilities, and it will be really difficult to define that in a regulated kind of structured way. I will, I suppose rather than talk about the kind of the specifics of a number, I suppose what I've always reflected on, having worked outside education for a number of years, and knowing the private sector as I do, it's interesting that in a lot of organisations, the chief finance officer is generally the second highest paid member of staff on, in an organisation, because they have that relative importance with the chief executive. And now I'm not going on record saying that they should be paid at that level in schools. But what I'm saying, it's an interesting perspective that across the other sectors, the CFO role is at the top end of the executive's salary, just below the chief executive role. However, in the education sector, it's not widely accepted that that is the right format. So I think what we need to do is understand what's causing school leaders not to kind of position their CFO at that level, and really start to understand, well, there may be reasons for it, but I do think those questions do start to need to be answered. But I'm a fan of, let's not give a tight framework. I don't think it's right to have a framework, but I do think that if we've got comfort all around chief executive salaries and head teacher salary being at a level, we should consider the roles directly underneath them and consider kind of the position they play in the strategic leadership in the organisation. And I think their pay should be relative to those discussions.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And if you're minded to do so, there's a piece of research that I've been involved in, and I've made a contribution to a management and education publication that majors on school business leadership. And in there, I talk about barriers to joined up leadership and historical hierarchies, which I think have created this mismatch that you talk about, and for some leaders, particularly with a pedagogical background, it's sometimes hard for them to reconcile investing in a CFO that is not directly involved in teaching and learning. But what we know, and of course we would say this, wouldn't we, given the positions that we occupy, that the right CFO or the right school business leader or the right chief operating officer can be defining for a trust, and in the end can be the difference between high attainment or mediocre, or at worst very poor levels of outcomes for children. So it's an interesting one, and a debate that will continue to rumble on. Lee, I
do think just to final point on,
sure,
on that particular one. I do think it's also around us as business leaders that need to do something to help change that as well, because I was asked recently, and this was a school that was thinking about joining our trust. A question was put to me, well, why do we need a deputy chief executive? What difference do you make? Now, for those who know me, I'm quite good at kind of responding to those kind of questions. But I think it's an interesting one, that the business manager role generally are perhaps a group of individuals that perhaps don't shout about kind of what difference they make. I can see why the school leaders sometimes don't kind of put the value around that, because if they just think, oh, these things happen behind the scenes, and that, you know, we just don't recognize that. And I think we as a body of individuals do need to consider around that value proposition. You know, we need to kind of show others the difference that we're making, the value that we're putting back into the schools. If we want to kind of command that level of influence and salary, actually there's a job that we need to do to be at the forefront of those discussions as well.
No, I absolutely agree. Professional confidence and assertiveness, you know, building your own brand, your own narrative, if you like, is really important, and something that yes, we recognise that, you know, we've got some work to do with colleagues to help them on that. Lee, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for your time today. Really enjoyed that, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks.